Process for considering special exit criteria from LEP services in Spring Branch ISD. In education, we have several guidelines when serving special populations. The two subpops we are going to discuss today are LEP students, or Limited English Proficient students, and students served by special education. More specifically, we are going to discuss dually labeled students, or those kiddos that fall under both categories. Let's take Arturo, for example. Arturo is a native Spanish speaker. He is an 8th grader that came to the United States in elementary school a few years ago. Arturo was first served in a bilingual classroom until he transitioned to the ESL program when he came to middle school. Because Arturo is a second language learner, the rate at which he acquires English is measured and monitored by his teachers, our district, TEA, and the federal government. Now let's talk about the day that Arturo may no longer need second language support in English. Maybe Arturo has reached the highest levels of language acquisition, or maybe, due to his disability, he's not expected to move beyond a certain language level. Either way, it may be time to determine if ESL services are still appropriate for Arturo, or if he should potentially exit our ESL program. As with everything in education, TEA has a specific process for exiting any student from bilingual or ESL services. Under Chapter 89, districts are required to use the current English proficiency exit criteria chart. The criteria are different from grade level to grade level, but students must always meet a reading, writing, and oral language criteria to exit the program. Normally, a special education LEP student can exit by criteria listed on this chart, which even allows for accommodated versions of state reading and writing content assessments. The LPAC representative, along with the rest of the ARD committee, reviews progress and met criteria, and they exit students accordingly. However, and here's the tricky part, what if Arturo is unable to meet the criteria due to his disability? What if he's going to take a different state assessment for reading or writing, one that's not listed on this chart? Or what if his disability prevents him from reaching advanced high on TELPAS? This is where another specific process from TEA comes into play. There are 6 steps that every LPAC and ARD representative should be familiar with in order to make decisions for their dually labeled students. Key ARD and key LPAC members should collaborate and should always have the state guidelines handy during their meetings. This is because the state of Texas is very specific about the criteria and how you go about setting it. The entire process can be found on TEA's website, but here is an outline of the steps. And here's a brief summary. In step 1, a meeting is scheduled between key ARD and key LPAC members at or near the beginning of the school year. They need to evaluate whether Arturo potentially qualifies for exit. In step 2, they would discuss if there is evidence of a need. Now, this process is not for groups of students. So in this step, the parties are going to really discuss Arturo as an individual. Before they discuss any of the evidence they may have, they should ask themselves, would taking ESL services away from Arturo negatively affect him in any way? If the answer is yes, Arturo is not a good candidate for this process, and we would leave him in the ESL program because we do not want to take away services that are supporting our students. But if they feel that ESL services are no longer benefiting him, each member would discuss and document the data they have that supports their recommendation. Examples of acceptable testing and historical evidence and data are also available on TEA's website. Members should also keep in mind that the need for this type of special criteria must be the result of the nature of Arturo's disability. In step 3, they specify assessments and English language proficiency test standards. On content assessments, it's very important to remember that if Arturo's test is to be changed, only state assessments may be used. the state of Texas provides different versions of their assessments for special education students, all of which may be used, but all students must still meet a state-established passing standard in order to meet exit criteria. On language tests, the collaborators look at our tutors' abilities on a domain-by-domain basis. By this we mean that reading and writing, listening and oral language are considered separately. The ARD LPAC members would determine if Advanced High on TELPAS is a reasonable goal for our tutor, given his disability, or if perhaps a lower level may be appropriate in one of these domains. They could also consider recommending that he take a different writing or oral language assessment. A list of approved assessments can also be found on TEA's website. In Step 4, they are required to prepare documentation. In Spring Branch ISD, we have a two-page form in our SEAS program that may be used for this documentation and is also intended for formal ARD. In Step 5, they discuss the recommended exit criteria in a formal ARD committee meeting. This may or may not be the student's annual ARD meeting, but it must be held early in the school year and prior to the testing they have designated in the collaboration documentation. This is when things would formally be set if the ARD committee is in agreement. Then the IEP would be updated with the documentation. All of these steps have happened prior to spring testing. The final step, which is Step 6, is an additional ARD that happens at the end of the school year. To be clear, this is an extra ARD that should happen after testing results have been received. The members of the ARD would review the results and also how our tutor has been doing in class since assessments were administered. If the ARD committee determines that exit is still appropriate, they finalize and document the change in placement. The LPAC would also document the decision in the permanent record file, and just like any other exited student, our tutor would be monitored for 2 years by the LPAC committee. Please note that this is a fictitious special education LEP student, and only an example of how you may set special criteria if there is a need. We certainly want to be serving all students for whom LEP services are appropriate, but we also know that unnecessary labels can negatively affect our students. Thank you all so much for everything you do for our special populations. If you have any questions about ARD-LPAC collaboration issues, please contact the ESL Bilingual Department or your Special Education Department representative.